You are listening to Lone Star Community Radio on 104.5 KCZWLP Conroe and 106.1 KZCCLP Conroe and worldwide on irlonestar.com.
Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, yes, it is afternoon. It is afternoon. We're a little late getting started today. This is Melanie Shuttle, Toast of the Town with Christy and Mel. It's noon on Wednesday, and so therefore, we are here, and we're glad to be here. Well, some of us are. Miss Christy is running a few minutes late today, and so I'm going to get us started. And the first thing I want to talk about is what a great weekend we had. It was kind of a little on the cool side. But after the 42 months of summer, it seems like that we've had the cool was welcome. But we had a great Catfish Festival weekend. And Dick, did you partake in Catfish this year?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember it?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I got my picture done with Wayne Toops. Got to meet him,
yeah.
so that was a lot of fun.
He's a good guy.
So,
well, kind of a good guy. When he's not in prison, he's a good guy. But anyway.
So, how long was he in prison for?
Oh, I don't know. I've known him for years.
Do you think that's where you have to go if you were born in Louisiana?
Pretty much, yeah.
Pretty much?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm just curious.
So having been a Thibodeau in an intermediary part of my life for like 30 years almost, I know a lot of those Cajuns, and you know what? They're just fun. They're not really bad people. They just like to have fun.
There's nothing wrong with that.
No, nothing wrong with it at all. Anyway, so Catfish Festival was good. And did you have the radio show and any booths or anything like that? Or the radio station, I'm sorry.
No, they were doing a lot of construction next door. There's a new shop, if you didn't know. And I felt it was just better not to have people coming and going while they're doing all the construction and the confusion. And then they're selling, some of the goods they sell are expensive, so I felt it was better just to let them finish their work so we don't have a lot of banging during your show today.
Aw.
So
you were worried about me. That's what you're telling me, right? Okay. Well, and then I was looking through Facebook this morning, and I saw a whole big, just all kinds of stuff going on about the upcoming Nutcracker markets and all of the. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to start worrying about Christmas shopping again. It just kills me.
Well, you can do it next door.
I can?
Yeah, the new shop. We're just going to keep plugging it.
And what is the new shop's name?
Well, one thing I like about the new shop, it's called Main Street Merchants on Main Street, of course. And what I love about what they do is all the goods they sell there are from local people. So it's for those people who are in between having their own storefront.
Very cool.
And then it's a lot of homemade stuff. Or there's kind of like a lot of, like, for example, one guy makes socks from plastic bottles.
Socks?
Yeah, so you're kind of like, what?
That's kind of what I'm doing. What?
So check them out. So that's happening next door. So that's a great gift buying place because it's unique.
Yes. And what a cool place though for people to, it's kind of like a upfront personal live Etsy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, okay.
Did you have a good festival?
Yeah,
I'll fill in for Christy for now until she gets here.
Well, good. Yes,
So
yes, I had a great festival. It was wonderful. Anyway, okay. So the other thing is that we've got coming up is in November we have elections, and you're saying to yourself, what elections?
Yeah, what elections are coming up, Mel?
Thank you, Christy. First of all, the Woodlands Township, which is, the Woodlands Township. You know how that goes. Everybody gets pretty excited about it.
Not really.
Okay, yeah.
That area reminds me of like it's the rich and powerful, and they don't want to have names. They're the unknown round table.
It is.
So
it is. Somebody, and I work for a couple of people in the Woodlands Township races, and somebody put it all into perspective for me over the weekend. They said, "You are all riled up on this Woodlands Township thing," and I said, "Well, I have clients down there, and I'm helping them, and it's all political. And it's what I do." And I was sort of defending myself, and they said, "It's a homeowners association."
pretty much.
And I was like, okay, kind of put me in my place. But anyway, it's big. It's a big thing.
Oh, and people are spending money. It must be.
120,000 people, and they got about 22,000 voters, something like that. So
Did you ask them, any of them, if they support the Hong Kong protest? Because I know that's the question to ask everybody these days.
It is the question to ask everybody.
We got to get you on record, Mel. How do you feel about this?
I support Hong Kong.
Oh, now we're off the air.
What?
China, they own us. So, man, you're not on it today.
I'm sorry. Oh, God, because I'm here talking by myself. That's why I'm thinking about the next thing I'm going to say. You're right. You are.
I told you I'm filling in with Christy.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you're good. You kind of look like her.
Well, so what else is going on with the ballot? Because I know.
Okay. So the constitutional amendments are on the ballot. Is that correct?
Is that really?
And there's 10 of them. See,
like for the state of Texas?
Yes, for the state of Texas.
What are we talking? Are we talking?
The really cool thing is that our guest today, nobody even knows he's here, is a candidate for a district judge. And he's a constitutional scholar on top of all that. He's like major Constitution stuff. But I mean, that would be U.S. Constitution. But anyway, he is, so he's giving me pointers as you ask questions.
That's good.
Holding up his fingers, giving me pointers. But anyway, there's 10 amendments on there. And number 4, I believe it is the most important one for Texans right now, I believe.
Wouldn't all 10 be important?
Yeah, but some are more important than others.
I don't think they see that. Do they see it like that?
Who?
They're all amendments, right? So they're all equal.
Does who see it like that?
The state.
Well, I don't care what the state thinks. I care what the people think.
Which one are they actually going to enforce? That's really the question people want to know.
All of them?
You think, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what's the most important one?
Okay, I think it's number 4. It's about permanently doing away with the thought or the possibility of having a state income tax in the state of Texas, which we don't have one, and we really shouldn't, but it's...
So we don't have one.
Uh-huh. And we
so we're voting on something that doesn't exist.
Exactly. Now you've got how you have just totally
But then it could exist because we haven't voted on something that says it'll never exist.
Exactly. You have got this down, Dick. You really do.
Okay.
Anyway, but the other thing about it is it's a tricky little question because you think you would say, yeah, I'm going to support that, but you can't vote yes. You have to vote no.
That seems typical.
Mm-hmm. I think so too. So anyway, it's all up to you. It's all up to you. You have to go out and find people to go vote with you and vote against it. Yeah, against it. Anyway, and then there's 10 of them.
Who gets to decide how the question's asked on those things? Because I always feel like that's usually, especially like the Woodlands and things,
it's like a trick question.
Well, yes, I'm saying that it's like someone whoever's devising how the forms. I always love the elementary level of educating people. Oh, this is what the form looks like.
Yeah.
This is the chat over here, and it's like
exactly.
And I go, they're doing this because we've all been there. Where it's like, oh, we're having a problem here.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
and yet. The questions are like you have to be a, linguistic scholar to understand them.
So we can say this question for your guests is why wouldn't they literally just say, vote, we're basically never have an income tax proposal or whatever ever in the state of Texas? Yes or no? Why don't they ask it like that instead of...
Because it's too easy. No, so why don't we just bring our guest in?
Because when I vote no this time, it really means no.
It really means no.
Okay, that makes sense to me.
Okay.
Everything makes sense. We don't need to talk about
it. Okay, so we have... come on in, guys. We're on the air, and I'm fixing to introduce our guest. And y'all grab a stool out there from... There you go. So... Our guest today is Robert Kasperzak, and if one of us calls him Bobby, just forgive us. It'll be all right. Anyway, so Robert, how are you today?
Doing well, thank you, ma'am.
You're welcome. We're glad to have you.
So sorry I'm a little late to the party. I had a few things going on today. A little crazy.
Look crazy.
Yeah.
You look wonderful.
Oh, thanks.
You do.
It must be stress complimenting my complexion or something.
That's good.
Anyway, how are you doing, Bobby?
Good, thank you.
So Dick filled in and was Christy for a few minutes.
I know, I was listening on the way here.
He did such a fine job.
I know.
And
he's the prettier version of me.
And his hair looks almost as good as yours.
Almost.
It's beautiful.
I know. We'll work on that.
Dick, your hair looks beautiful, by the way.
Thank you.
So anyway, our guest is Robert Kasperzak.
Yes.
He is running for the district judge, the new district judge post in Montgomery County which is the 457 for those of you taking notes, 457. Anyway, and he's going to rule. He's going to win, he says.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know, we also have a couple more guests, too, and I've been having them formulate some questions.
Oh, my gosh.
For our amazing judge candidate here. But before we get to that,
okay.
I would love to hear why you are the most qualified candidate for that judge position.
Sure. Thank you guys for having me, first of all. So this particular court has just been created by the state, and it's been created to handle all civil cases to help. Right now, in Montgomery County, our civil court calendar is incredibly backlogged. And so our Board of Judges has gone to our commissioners, and the commissioners have agreed that we need a new court, and then it got pushed by our state representative and our state senators, and the state ultimately agreed and has created this court. So it's a brand new court. It'll hear all civil cases. My background in particular has been for the last 17 years. I've been a lawyer for 15. But for 17 years, I've been involved in civil cases, civil litigation. I started clerking for a civil lawyer in my second year of law school, which is why I say 17 years. And then my entire career, obviously, for the last 15 years has been involved in civil court, a lot of business law, transactional law, basically all things civil. If it's civil, I've probably seen it.
Well, and we have talked before about this and about how the courts had decided to go to a more specialized format because it really streamlines the work and how it can proceed through the courts.
That's correct. You would rather, and I think it makes sense. If you have a judge who, for instance, has, let's say, a criminal background or a background as a criminal lawyer, it doesn't make much sense to ask that judge to learn and understand quickly issues relating to, say, family law.
Yeah, because the codes, are extensive.
Exactly, and they're incredibly different. So, there's one set of books that are applicable to procedure in a criminal court. Mm-hmm. There's another set of books that's applicable to the family code. There's another set of books that's applicable to probate law. And then there's a whole other set of books that's applicable to what we call civil law.
Right. And so what makes it so important to really have that background? Not only is it, knowing the procedures and codes, but the laws are so extensive and varying so much. To really know those specific laws that pertain to that particular area, I would think would be vital in order to streamline things.
Sure. You want to, especially in this particular court, because we are so backlogged, and the idea right now, I think, is that the minute that whoever wins this election takes the bench, you're probably going to get 1,000 or more active cases handed to you.
That's a lot.
So the county isn't going to just slowly turn the spigot on and say, okay, get yourself up to speed and learn how to do this.
Right.
They're going to expect you to know what you're doing, to understand these concepts, to understand these laws.
Inside and out.
Understand the process. The process is really what's most important. And yes, inside and out, exactly. And they're going to open the floodgates on you on day one and say, go.
Yeah.
And you have to be able to do that in order to do the job that really this court is created to do.
So I had the privilege somewhere of hearing you describe the difference between civil and criminal court, the stacks of paper and all of that.
Sure.
So go ahead, explain that, because it just brought it to life. So just explain.
Yeah, and it's hard if we're on the radio, so I can't do visual, but
well, you do have a camera.
No, you have a camera right in front of you. So
so civil law is very paperwork driven. And it's because the process itself, one of the differences between civil and criminal law is the flow of information. In a criminal court, the information only has to flow one way. The defendant is constitutionally entitled to all of the evidence that the prosecution is going to use against him in order to convict him of a crime.
Right.
But the prosecution is not entitled to all of the information the defendant is going to use to defend himself.
Okay.
So the information flow is only one direction. In a civil court, the information flow is both directions. both parties are entitled to all of the evidence that the other side is going to use in its case.
So full disclosure.
Complete full disclosure. And in the business context, I was general counsel to a publicly traded energy company for several years. And it would not be unusual for me to be copied on or directly engaged in 400 emails in a day.
Wow.
And, in my case, some of those are going to be privileged because I'm the company's lawyer
Right.
and there's attorney-client privilege. But that just shows the volume of information that flows inside of a company. So let's just say, for instance, I wasn't a lawyer and these emails were not privileged. They would all be subject to discovery in a criminal trial, or in a civil trial, excuse me. So now, that's one day has 400 emails. Multiply that by 3 or 4 years, you can see the stacks of information
Right.
that have to get transferred. Similarly, if you've got a complex sort of issue, say something like an oil spill, that will end up in a civil court. You need to be able to have, those clients are going to have expert upon expert talking about what happened and why. So now you're going to have to, as a judge, be able to differentiate between the experts. You're going to have to qualify the experts. You're going to have to understand who's really an expert and who's some guy that just has, a high school degree or a high school diploma and with no sort of continuing education behind that. And in certain fields, that can disqualify somebody from being an expert.
Sure.
So the volume of information in a civil case is immense. Conversely, the volume of information in a criminal case is really quite small. There's not a whole lot of paperwork that's getting
Right.
filed with the court. There are a few forms. Now, there may be a ton of evidence.
Right, but that's a little bit different story.
Evidence is
Yeah.
going to be different than just information. And
Yeah.
so the civil process is really dominated, and where the cost driver of civil litigation is in this process of discovery. Discovery is the back and forth exchange of information.
Well, and I think too, and this is something that I know that we had touched on before, with your vast scope and your varying experience with these different types of civil cases, to be able to take all of this data and crunch it down and get a handle on it pretty quick can be a real challenge if you're not accustomed to doing so.
Sure, and one of the things with civil law, it's almost easier defining civil law by what it's not. So, family law is fairly easy to define. We're talking about divorces, we're talking about child custody,
Right.
we're talking about alimony and spousal support, those
Right.
types of issues. Probate is fairly easy to define. There's somebody in your family has passed away without a will, and you're trying to figure out how to dispose of that
Right.
individual's property. Criminal law, if the state has arrested you and now you're being prosecuted, where you're either going to pay a fine or go to jail, that's criminal law. Pretty much everything else
Is civil.
So, eviction, civil. Car accident, civil. Contract dispute,
Your neighbor
civil.
tears down your fence.
Your neighbor tears down your fence, civil. All of these different, everything other than what we've described in these other types
Yeah.
of law falls into this broad category called civil. And like you said, you have to be able to understand not just the procedure. A lab monkey can learn, procedure in
Right.
terms of how long do you get to respond when a petition is filed.
Right.
You have to be able to understand oftentimes complex concepts. For instance, there's a tort, and tort is basically a civil wrong called fraud. Everybody has heard of fraud. Well, there are 5 elements that you must prove in order to establish fraud. If you can satisfy those 5 elements, then you've essentially proved fraud.
Right.
In a civil context, criminal fraud is something a little bit different. So as a judge, you have to be able to, first of all, know what those elements are.
Right.
And second of all, be able to sort of take a fact and apply it to those elements and see if the fact fits the element.
Right.
So it's concepts more than it is just, I equate it to when you were in high school history class. When I was in high school, at least, they weren't teaching us cool things about, personal stories. They were teaching us Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492.
Right. It was dates and not concepts. It was dates.
It was
and,
dates.
And
it was
chronological sequences.
Facts.
Rote memorization of
Right.
dates. And that's part of it, of course. You have to know the procedure part of it, but you also have to be able to understand the concepts involved
Right.
in it. And that's really where I think my 15 plus years of experience in this is going to pay off. And that's why I think I'm the right candidate.
That's awesome. Well, we have a couple of extra guests with us here today. So Dylan and Jackson are here. They are freshmen at Willis High School. Today is job shadowing day. And so they're out. They've been kind of spending some time with me. But Jackson is taking an introductory law class right now, and they are focusing a lot on constitutional law and how it can apply to every day. And I think it's really important for kids at this age to start understanding, Constitution has a lot of information in it to be able to crunch it down. But what would you say would be some of the bigger issues, I guess, in your job every day? Obviously, the Constitution is your Bible, for lack of another word. What do you think are the biggest ideas in there that kids these age, they're looking at you as a constitutional scholar, as a community leader, as somebody that's running for office that wants to be able to make rulings on such important cases. Civil law is a huge portion of what happens in this country. What are some of the most important things that these kids can focus on to to kind of understand your job and the importance of this job that you want and why you're such a good fit because you are a constitutional scholar?
Sure. And I think one of the most important parts of our Constitution and what I think, and again, my background in undergraduate school, I have a degree in political science. My focus in undergraduate school was on American political thought. So I've essentially read, I think, probably just about everything any of the founders have ever written. I studied under one of the premier and foremost conservative constitutional scholars in the country. So on this topic, I know a little bit because I've studied it. The founders knew what they were doing. They didn't just haphazardly throw a document together and say, over time this will change. They carefully planned each word. They painstakingly wrought themselves over each word. Every word in that document, much like the way like a business lawyer should write a contract. Every word in there
is selected meticulously
because it has a particular meaning.
Right.
And so when you read the Constitution, and there's a trend these days to say, the quote unquote, the Constitution is a living document. I don't really understand what that means. It's a legal document, which means that it's constricted to the words that are on the pages.
Right.
In a legal sense, you don't get to bring in what's called parole evidence, outside evidence to prove what the document says. You just look at the document and you read it.
Right.
These guys were adamant that this document was not a living, whatever that means, document. It was not going to change. It was not subject to change. And that's really the beauty of the thing, is that it's survived now 243 years. Yes. And it's
you can do math too, folks.
And it still, works. It still is going as originally drafted. We've only amended it, 26 times?
Right.
As opposed to the Texas Constitution, which gets amended, all of the time. It's just a different way of approaching it. So one of the big things to take away is that these guys they were very smart, first of all. It was probably outside of Athens in, the time of Plato and Aristotle, this to me is probably the largest collection of intellectuals the world has ever seen. And they all happened to be at the same place at the same time. It was quite amazing.
Works out very well for us.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. These guys had their own disputes. Alexander Hamilton and James Madison collaborated to write what are known as the Federalist Papers, and these were pamphlets that were issued in New York to support the Constitution. They were signed under a pseudonym named Publius, meaning Greek for public. At the same time, it's argued that Hamilton was writing the counter-arguments called the Caesar Papers because they were being signed by Caesar, and he was publishing those arguing against the Constitution, and then he would write the Federalist paper that really proves that the counter-argument is wrong, and here's why.
Are you kidding me?
No, the guy was playing both. He was a genius. He was playing chess against himself. But you turn around, and just a few years later, James Madison, who had helped write the Federalist Papers and authored several of them, became bitter enemies with Alexander Hamilton over the issue of sort of federalism, and federalism being the concept that who's gonna be in control? Are the states gonna be in control, or is there gonna be a strong federal government? Mm-hmm. And Hamilton's vision was that there would be a strong centralized government. And over time, he's proven to be right.
Right.
Now, people confuse strong government with big government, and that shouldn't be confused. Strong government, limited to the enumerated powers that are listed in the Constitution, the first three articles, Article 1 dealing with the legislative branch because it's the most important, Article 2 dealing with the executive because it's the next most important,
right,
and Article 3 dealing with the judiciary. That's the document until the Bill of Rights came later, the first 10 amendments, and then several amendments after that. But Madison sided with Thomas Jefferson, and they were both Virginians. They were both more agricultural, being from the South.
Right.
And they heavily, and Virginia was the largest state in the Union, they heavily favored states' rights. They wanted a weak central government, and they wanted the states, sort of like a confederation of states, to really control the country. Hamilton, who at a young age had the most important man in the country, George Washington, I think George Washington probably never made a decision in his adult life that he didn't ask Alexander Hamilton what he thought of it. Hamilton was a genius. He had the most important man with him. And so when George Washington became the first president, Alexander Hamilton became the Secretary of the Treasury. And really, the country that we see today was based off of Hamilton's sort of grand design. But these guys didn't like Jefferson and Madison ultimately despised Hamilton over this particular issue. So while these guys were all together during the Declaration of Independence, during the fight for independence, during the forming of the Constitution, fast forward just a couple of years, and they didn't like each other anymore. So it wasn't all let's sit around the fire and sing Kumbaya. They had I mean, it got to the point where Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton had a famous duel.
Right. Well, but we wouldn't. Politics wouldn't be what it is if we all just sat around and agreed on everything.
Sure. So those are, I think, understanding, and this is the part that you don't get in, say, high school. They're teaching you dates, and hopefully, I haven't been in high school in a long time. I'm not going to tell you how long, but hopefully in schools today, they're teaching kids more of these stories because this stuff is kind of cool.
It is cool.
Now, if you're just sitting around saying, the Constitution was signed in 1780 or enacted in 1789 or the Declaration of Independence in 1776, okay, but what does that do for you? Understanding the process, understanding that these were human beings that were doing this, that were writing these documents. They didn't just come into existence like Moses with the tablets.
Right.
These were actually the product, and Alexander Hamilton says it in Federalist No. 1, essentially saying that this is the first time in human history that people get to choose their style of government based on sort of reason and thought instead of relying solely on accident and force. Mm-hmm. And in the history of the world, it had always been forced government. A military ruler comes in and takes control, and he says, these are the laws, and if you don't like them, I'm going to kill you. Or it's just been handed down over time. Accident would be like a monarchy, where you've got a king just because he's the relative of the last king who was a relative of the last king. This was the first time in human history that we actually got to decide, that a group of people actually got to decide for themselves how they wanted to be governed. And it turned out pretty good.
Yeah, and in a time in history when we are such sticklers on the backstory, it seems like that backstory of the founding of our nation and the backbone that makes us who we are would be vitally important. So maybe we need to start talking about that and start sharing those stories, because I know when I got into college, that's whenever it really got really interesting to me, because you got to hear these stories, and they were real people. They weren't just names printed on a piece of paper.
Yeah, well, for instance, Thomas Jefferson, who is, our third president and, the author of the Declaration of Independence, one of our most prominent founding fathers, he actually didn't believe the Constitution should be an everlasting document. He thought that we should replace the Constitution every 19 years.
That's interesting.
Every 19 years.
Huh.
Now, fortunately, it didn't work out his way.
Right.
A lot of times he was mad because he didn't get his way very often. And I'm a Hamilton fan more than I'm a Jefferson fan, so I'm sort of pleased with the way it turned out.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, going back to what we were discussing, so, having this broad understanding and conceptualization of not only the Constitution, but of civil law, one of the important things that you brought up was how many cases, the load that's going to be awaiting the person that takes over this job on day one. How are you going to attack it? What's your mentality on how we can start working on this from day one?
Well, some of this is going to be a little bit more difficult because, like I said, I'm gonna inherit a lot of cases.
Of course.
And so with the cases you're inheriting, you're also inheriting a schedule that had been made before you.
Right.
And that schedule is, in a lot of respects, sort of inflexible. You're not going to really move that schedule up. More than likely, it's going to stay where it is or maybe move back a little bit.
Until you can kind of work through it.
So, you start working through them. And certainly, I think one of the things Judge Bays did, because she was faced with a similar problem when she came into office.
Right.
And one of the things that she was able to utilize, and I think she still does, is what they call a DWOP. And that's essentially dismissal without for want of prosecution.
Okay.
So you sue me and nothing happens.
Right.
So the case is just sitting there. The judge will call you in on an order to show cause and say, why shouldn't I dismiss your case? It's been sitting here for 4 months. You've done nothing with it.
Right.
Prove to me that you're doing something with it. And then you'll have to establish why the case is just sitting there. And if you don't, I dismiss it. It goes away.
It's done.
And so you can clear some cases that have just been stagnant that way.
Right.
And that'll help alleviate some of the caseload. We're not the first county in Texas that is faced with this particular problem. We're not the first county in the United States faced with this problem.
Right.
So you can look to what other courts have done in order to streamline their process. You can look at what other jurisdictions have done to streamline their process. I think one of the things we can probably take better advantage of is technology. We're here on the radio. We're also, I can see my beautiful face over here on TV. We should be able to utilize, as I was general counsel to a company that was based in Holland, and I lived in Willis, Texas. And I would be on a conference call in Germany with guys in Holland, guys in California, guys in England, and me in Willis, Texas. Now, I would sit in my car in the garage so I wouldn't wake up my daughter and my wife, but I could participate in a conference call. I could share my screen. I could see and hear everything that everybody, we can video conference.
Right.
The courts can take advantage of that. You don't necessarily have to call a lawyer in order to communicate with them. You can do video conferencing. It's I don't know why we can't do that. And another thing that'll save the client a little bit of money because now you're not paying the lawyer to drive back and forth to the courthouse.
Travel times, right.
So the lawyer can sit in his office, do other work while he's waiting for his case to be called. His case gets called, he gets his case handled, and he's out. Meanwhile, other people who are waiting for their case are doing other work while they're waiting for their case, so their case gets called, and then they're out. So I think you can utilize technology. I think we can sort of stagger starts. You should be able to understand this particular hearing is going to take 20 minutes, this particular hearing is going to take 5 minutes, this one's going to take 2 hours. You can schedule your day according to how long you think
something's going to, how much time it's going to take.
I like to think of this as a game of Tetris. You've got a certain amount of time in your day, and you've got all these different sized pieces that you're going to fit together to fill your time. Right. And the more gaps that you have, that's wasted time.
Right.
So you want to have complete blocks all the way up on your Tetris board because that means you're making productive use of your time. So filling your time productively, I think is a big thing. Not that our judges aren't doing that. I think our judges do a great job. There's just too much work.
Yeah.
That's really the big thing. So really getting somebody in who knows what they're doing, who can hit the ground running, who can get started right away clearing cases, that's going to be the number one thing in clearing cases. It's just having another body there doing it full time.
That's awesome. So what do you think of the campaign process so far? Switch gears a little bit.
It's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
You know, I'm now 5 months away from an election, and it's grueling.
It's a lot of work.
It's going to get worse, right? And on the one hand, I enjoy it. I love meeting people. I love the interaction. But at the same time, it's not without sacrifices. You know, I'm sacrificing time. Well, I'm not practicing law in order to run for office. So I'm sacrificing income for the next 6 months in order to do this. I'm sacrificing time with my family.
Of course.
My wife is awesome. She comes to as many events as she can. But she also has to be a mother to our daughter and spend time at home. And God bless her, she's picked up the slack while I'm doing other things. I also own my own business. I own a gym. So my gym suffers because I'm not there as much. But I've got about 75 members in my gym. They all understand and support me in what I'm doing. So campaigning is tough. On top of that, I think I'm not a politician. I'm a nerd, and this is one thing I'll tell the kids. You guys are thinking about going into law. You hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I love to argue. I should have been a lawyer." Arguing is really a very small part, especially in the civil context, of what it means to be a lawyer. To be a lawyer in the civil context, you have to love to read, you have to love to write, and you have to love to research, because that's where you're going to spend all your time. And I had a kid your age, probably closer to your age, and said, "Man, that means you got to be a nerd." And he's right. In a lot of respects, you've got to be a nerd. When you get to law school, your first semester of law school, you're going to have about 600 to 700 pages of reading every night. Every night. So
just FYI.
Love to
read.
No
more Cliff Notes.
And then you got to brief all those cases. And now the good thing about this is you're reading cases. So you're reading stories. They're all just a series of short stories. And your job when you brief them is to extract the information that you need out of it in order to create a brief. But so the reading is a little bit easier I say easier. A lot of other lawyers would slap me in the face for saying law school is easy. But for me, it was easy because I enjoyed the stories.
Yeah.
I like stories. I like people. I like understanding what was happening to these particular people in a given instance.
Yeah.
So that's what I think made law school fun for me.
Well, one of the things too that I wanted to bring up though that I think is an important point. I've watched you. I've actually witnessed this. Become friendly with one of your fellow candidates. And I think it is such a great testament to the fact that there is civility still alive and well in the political spectrum. With everything that's going on in the country right now and all the turmoil that's going on, as a voter, I want to say thank you for reminding us all that you can come out and promote yourself for a job, which is what you're doing. You're applying for a job, and we're all interviewing you. And do that with class and grace and great respect for your office. And I think it is such an important thing that people need to pay attention to. So as a voter, thank you very much for exhibiting that kind of behavior, because to us and, we that have children that we want to be aware and involved in the political process, you're setting such an amazing example for these kids and actually giving them interest in what you're doing, which I think a lot of kids have lost interest in. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Very good.
Well,
you're allowed to compliment me anytime.
Well, I think it's something that people need to pay attention to. We hear the negativity and we hear the bad things all the time, but we don't always get to really focus on the good. And I think people need to see that because, when we're at different events and we see different people interacting, there are some that aren't so friendly with their opponents and don't know how to be civil or socially warm, we'll put it.
Yeah, and there are those that will stick a big stick in and just stir it up real good,
Sure.
Just for the sake of it. And the fact that you're, what?
Okay, these boys have been over here typing questions on their phones. So, no. You want to come over here? Why don't you ask? Come here.
Hey, you can
Come on, Jackson. So this is Jackson. Say hi, Jackson.
Hello. So I have a few questions for you. One of them is, why would you like to be involved within a civil court rather than a criminal court?
Well, that's a good question because I think in my particular race that's sort of applicable. My background is in civil law. I'm not a criminal lawyer. So you put me in a criminal court, I'm going to be lost. I don't really know how to do that process. But because I've been doing this for so long, this is, I think in a lot of respects, when you're in law school and you're coming out of school and you're looking for a job, your career almost finds you more than you find your career. So for me in particular, I originally wanted to be a criminal prosecutor. I thought I would be a good prosecutor. But where I was at, in order to go to work for the district attorney, you had to clerk for the district attorney, and the clerk jobs with the district attorney were unpaid internships. And I was not in a financial position where I could go work for free. So where the paid internships are going to be in private practice, and I found a paid internship working in civil law. And I was blessed, I was fortunate to find a very good lawyer who took me under his wing, and it was not without pains for him, I'm sure. I'm a pretty tough-willed person. There were days I was leaving my office in tears because it was just hard.
Ooh,
He was hard on me. But I'd like to think that he also made me a very good lawyer because of it. And him and I remain friends to this day. So that, because he did civil law, and that's where I worked when I was in law school, and then I worked for him after law school, that's where I got my niche. That's where I grew an understanding of the type of things that I could do. I left that pretty early on to start my own practice, maybe a little bit naive. But I was like, I'm doing this for you. I can do it for myself. Why not? And so I started my own practice. I was pretty young. And at that point, you kind of take everything that comes through the door in order to make money. Like, you're not turning anything away. And again, I just found a niche with a group of guys that was forming companies and developing companies. And so I started working with them. I had somebody call me and say, hey, can you take a private company and reverse merge it into a public company? I said, heck yeah, I can do that. I'd never done it before in my life. But we did it, and I figured it out. And from there, the more you do things, the more experience you get, the better you get at it. And so that's what's got me into civil law.
Well, first, I want to give Dylan, I want Dylan to be able to ask a question. Talking that microphone, ask him one quick question.
I'll be fast.
Why do you want to be the judge?
Well, I think I can do a lot of good. I think the job obviously applies to my skill set, my background, my experience. This is home. Montgomery County is home for me. We live in Conroe. And I see this as an opportunity to legitimately make a difference in this community and to do some good and help.
Awesome. You know what? I think this is going to start a whole new idea for a new series, and let high school kids start talking and quizzing our candidates.
You
I think it's great.
should.
I think it's a new forum. Kind of a new forum. Okay, Dick is telling us we have to wrap up, but we're having a great time. Thank you so much, Bobby.
Thank you.
Robert.
Thank you.
We appreciate you, and I always learn so much. I feel like I should have a notebook, take notes. Anyway. And thank you, boys, for being with us today. We appreciate you.
I know. And so we're going to talk about some great new ideas. I think we could utilize you, too. Okay. Obviously, y'all are pretty comfortable in front of the microphone, so that's a good thing.
All
Two
right.
really good questions, too.
Look at that. I know.
All right. So bye, everybody. Thank you very much. I can't hear the music, so it's making me nuts. But
we'll
anyway.
see you next Wednesday for Toast the Town with Christy and Mel. Until then, make it a great week.